Hello, mentors. Welcome to meeting for budget plans, February 8th. These will be having two parts as usual, and we're pretty much in the middle of the quarter, and there's going to be 8 meetings, so this is pretty much half of it. So you can start recognizing which goals you have accomplished as a mentor so far with your group of co-mentors and with your LAs, and also kind of make a plan for the second half. Okay, what have I struggled with, and who could help me with this? Maybe the TA Alessandra, or in Slack you could ask me, Andres, or the LAs, your commenters. So try to make a plan on, okay, which challenges seem to keep being a challenge and kind of hard to overcome. And think about this. We still have time. It's, of course, a very short quarter, and teaching, excellence in teaching takes years for sure. But anyways, this is a micro universe, and we just try to get better. What to look for? The framework. So you can look at the 9 components on the framework and try to reflect, okay, which would I focus in the second half of the quarter to really grow? So let's go back to the meeting. There's 2 parts. The first one is budget buildings, around 45 minutes, in which kids will develop micro businesses with plans, budgets, test it out, adjust it. So there's a lot of open-ended discussion, but there's also a part which is more closed and in which students can do more kind of traditional math just to get them started. And also it's useful for you to see what's the number sense of your students, what they know and what they don't know about equations, modeling them, numerical reasons, number sense, etc. The second part, it's kind of a follow-up, helping our school. So let's help our school create a budget to get supplies that we think we need the most. And so the second part is even more open, and it's more collaborative than the first part. So time management, some tips in part 1. You may eliminate a drafting part, which is a really cool technique of dealing with cards. But if you don't have much time, you can make it faster. So a bit less fun, but still okay. So hopefully you can do this drafting a little bit, but if not, it's totally okay to just streamline. And then be aware of downtime moments as usual where nothing happens, and try to react fast to move on. We'll be working with 3.1 from last week, working balance with co-mentors, so all this co-mentoring reflection. And our new component is 1.2, engage all students. This is one of the most challenging aspects in teaching, engaging students. Pretty much you could be an excellent teacher, prepare for everything, know the topic very well, etc., anticipate many things. But when it comes to student engagement, it's a science, but also an art. And there's a lot about reading what's happening and how can I react. Can we prepare for that? Yes, but it's hard because sometimes it can go beyond your control. So some meetings, you will have kids more engaged. There's other maybe external variables where kids are not that engaged. But we should have a discussion, and hopefully in orientation we'll do, about what tools we have, or what things that we have in control can we make just to try to engage most students. So the goals, mathematically, we want to understand basic concepts or financial math, very basic, fixed cost, variable costs, revenue, profits, etc. So keep it kind of basic, but still start talking about these technical terms and introduce them to students. This is one of the big goals of this meeting, financial math, which is very important for everyone. Create budgets using diagrams, visuals, tables, etc., making sense of the variables that come into play and numbers that don't change. Use ratios, percentages, and mental math to solve problems involving resource management with time and money, and also make decisions that can optimize outcomes. So a little bit of optimization there. I know last meeting we did, finding these optimal values. So this is a follow-up in that sense. It's a week follow-up in which students are still thinking about how to optimize, how to make something as good as possible. And finally, scaling. You may have a small business, and a question would be, how would you scale this that works for 10 customers to maybe 100 or 1,000 customers? And I mean, it's basically using ratios, multiplication, fractions, but maybe it can get even more interesting in more real situations where some things change linearly and some things just stay the same. So it's kind of a mix between different types of growth. So keep it open like that. And the enrichment goals. So what's the vibe of the meeting? Aside from just teaching the math, or together with the math, what else could I be teaching for community goals? So we have 4, and you can create your own, of course. Frame possible future situations in which we run successful and sustainable businesses that have a positive impact in the local world. So we want kids really to imagine, that's probably the most important goal for the meeting, having kids imagine that they can actually run a business or work in a successful company, etc., etc. So really, really have them dream big. Speak up against corporations or organizations that profit unfairly at the expense of common resources. So try to be aware of that. Of course, when there's money involved, there's going to be some unfairness, and don't be afraid to talk about that. So even if kids brought it up, that would be great. Corporations that are not too good in terms of, being greedy and etc. So just don't be afraid to bring that. Even if you have your favorite non-favorite company, you can just state some facts. This company makes this or this, and there's a lot of going on in the news this year and last year about monopolies, etc. That's totally fine to talk about. Design a plan for our schools that involves thinking about their needs and use math to make it concrete. So this will actually be captured in part 2. And finally, appreciate the efforts of people that start a small business, reflect about the struggles, and cherish the satisfactions that this can have on them and, of course, in other people. So it connects to the first goal, right? It's kind of the other side. So not just frame it, but also appreciate it of people that, have had successful experiences with, opening a restaurant or selling some shirts, etc. Take a quick look now at the 2 parts, and let's just use the teaching the student workbook for that. You're going to start with a discussion on part 1 about money and finances. So these are some excellent questions, but they're not the only ones. So you may have your own. For example, would you like to work in a company or starting a business? What's your ideal salary? What would you do with that money? Of course, kids may be a little surprised that you're talking money and budgets, but that's kind of the point, that it's surprising to them and it opens up a new world. But it's not just brand new. They may bring experiences from parents or family or friends, etc., that can complement that. Then we have a small definition. And then we're going to some notice and wonder part, in which we give a very fixed proposition, a very fixed plan for Anna. She has 2 businesses going on, the Zebra Mugs and the Comfy Quills. Of course, this information may not be totally complete, so there's room for students to, speculate. What would you ask Anna? What do you wonder? And then it's about actually, there's some questions to get deeper. For example, Anna's thinking of a mega family combo. She's thinking of which would be a good price. Can you help her? So there's semi-closed questions, pretty almost closed, but with some little bit of openness and ambiguity, or room for different answers. So it's also important that kids can have maybe 2 different answers and compare them. Then we will analyze the business, so the Zebra and the Comfy Quills. And you have this table here, but you can create your own aspect mathematical expression to find its value in dollars, the value, and if it's positive or negative. So if you're gaining money or just giving money away. And then you balance out if what was the actual profit, the net gain, the real change of money in your pocket, because you are making investments, right? And then some open math discussion. So after that, it's a very fun part, the business project. Let's go back to the teaching manual. So this is part 1. So the introduction is where we have these questions. And as you see a trend in this curriculum and these meetings, of course, it started with questions and not just with theory and lecturing. questions are great, great ways to start engaging students and actually driving the meeting, that the meeting is driven by the students' answers. After we have Anna's projects, so where students analyze and compare the two budgets, these guys, the zebra and the quilts. And then part three, number three of this part one is your business, and students will create a business plan, share it, and adjust it. So they already know about Anna, and they have an idea of how, what a budget looks like. And now it's time for them to create businesses. This is going to happen with these cards, and you're going to learn more about it, of course, in orientation. Let's just open this. So there's 24 cards for the drafting part. Each card will have some questions. So you're going to mix them. Make sure that no student starts with repeated cards. And at the end, it's fine if two students end up with the same card. So you can read more in the teaching manual, because this is just an overview. But the idea is that students, little by little, they end up with less and less cards by just drafting, by moving them to the next partner, to the partner to the right or to the left. And at the end, they just end up with just one card. And that's inspiration for business. Each card has 4 questions. For example, for these sports equipment, soccer balls or anything similar. What's the scale of your enterprise? And we included these heavy words here in purpose so that students really ask other students or you, hey, what do you mean by scale? What do you mean by profitable or investment, initial investment? What is essential variables? So it's a way of learning language by actually not just telling them, but okay, you have to answer in this context all these questions. So we have, for all taste tests, hopefully, teach a language, being a tour guide, natural products, organize a video tournament, and you can talk about how UCI is, big name in video games, and all sorts of questions. Of course, kids may come up with a different business, and that's totally fine. This is just a starter, right? So it's not totally mandatory, or they can just adapt it. But this is just to offer some inspiration, because if you just ask them to create a business, it may be a little hard for some students just out of nowhere to come up with something. So these cards just have that, that effect. And this is pretty much part one. What they're going to do with their business is, let's go into, so they're just going to fill the rest of the data for your card. So the data is answering the questions, of course, and add any other data that you consider useful. So they create their business. And then they're going to poll the teammates. Would you buy my item or my service at the price that I chose? Is it reasonable, right? Financially reasonable? Or is it too cheap or too expensive? And then you can poll again. So they're going to get some feedback. Then they find the earnings by projecting sales and kind of apply what Anna did here, the fictional Anna, to their own interest. So there's a video, of course, about this Anna's project, and part 2 also has a video. So I won't talk much about it, but let's take a quick look. Part 2. So it's a follow-up to part 1. Students work together to create a $4,000 budget of items or services to car later or via to their middle school. And the main enrichment goals is that students can talk about their schools, and you mentors can familiarize more with the students' schools or situations. And don't focus much on numerical calculations, but more about the conceptual thing about budgeting, like before just doing calculations. Budget is limited, so what are my priorities? Is it fair? Or is there any equity? So there's going to be a lot of discussion about, okay, what do we really need? Not me, single student, but we all need, or the students that didn't come to this meeting, or even my middle school as a whole. So a good discussion on culture, right? And social fairness, balance. can happen there. So it's more straightforward, a little more simple than the previous activities. So your school has received this check to spend in resources. How would you spend this work and create a budget? What are the things for the school, needs for the school? Prioritize. Will you invest some of the money after that or spend it all, right? In other words, would you maybe allocate something to invest in selling any kind of food or any resources that gives you more money every year so that you can gain more? So that part of financial math, it's also important here, the investments. Because if you spend it all, then it's very good, but you don't have any money. So that's the meeting. And hit me out in Slack or in orientation. You can also, we can answer lots of questions that you may have. If you have majors relating to, these topics, then it's totally great. Or if you have family that runs a business and you have you want to share some cool things about budgets, that's pretty great. Okay, thank you. Have a lot of fun in the meeting. Goodbye.